Good evening. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission, Tuesday, March 27th. In the absence of the chair and vice chair, we're going to do things a little differently this evening. I will open the meeting as Planning Commission Secretary, so I'll call the meeting to order. I'll take a roll call. Commissioner Gomez.
Here, sir.
Commissioner Gooding.
Here.
Commissioner Mackin.
Here.
Commissioner Patel.
Here.
Commissioner Sayasan.
Here.
With that, the first order of business will be for the commission. I'll entertain a motion to appoint an acting chair for the meeting this evening. So,
I will move that Commissioner Mackin be appointed as acting chair.
I'll take a second if there is one. Great. I'll take a vote, please. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Mackin. The chair is yours. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners. I hope to not disappoint you. And any questions or problems, please always talk to me. We have the introduction tonight. I'm honored to introduce 3 new commissioners. We have first Commissioner Patel, and if you'd like to say anything by way of an introduction, please feel free.
I'm excited to be here, and I hope that we all get to. I'm excited to be here, and I hope that things go smoothly tonight. I'm sure they will, and I'm excited to work with everyone here.
All right. Thank you. And Commissioner Gooding?
Yes, I also am very excited to be here. It's a great opportunity to serve the city. I've lived here for quite a while now, and it's sort of give back time.
All right. And finally, we have Commissioner Gomez.
Yes, equally honored to be here, and I look forward to contributing in a positive manner to the work that the city's trying to do.
All right. Thank you very much, and we're really pleased that we finally have a full component of commissioners because we've had some empty chairs for a while. So we're going to start tonight's agenda with the adoption of the agenda. Do we have any changes or modifications? And if not, I'll entertain a motion for approval of adoption of the agenda.
I will move that the agenda be adopted as is.
You have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Motion carries. Next, we move to the consent calendar. And the consent calendar is normally for adoption of routine items. And they're acted upon with one motion unless anyone from the public or any of the commissioners wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar. On the consent calendar, we have the approval of the draft action minutes from February 27, 2018. Anyone want to remove anything, or member of the public? Seeing no one. All right, then could we have a motion for approval of the consent calendar?
I will move that the consent calendar be approved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Next, we move to oral communications. And oral communications is an opportunity for anyone who would like to address the commission regarding items that are not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone here we have in the audience would like to address the Planning Commission? No? Okay. Moving along. Written communications, I have no items to acknowledge. We move into new business, and new business tonight we have a public hearing regarding use permit UP 6-17 at 3795 Bayshore Boulevard. It's in the TC2 Southeast Bayshore Trade Commercial District. Could we please have a staff report?
Yes, thank you. The applicant requests a use permit for the use of an existing paved site at 3795 Bayshore Boulevard for the outdoor storage of vehicles, equipment, and materials. This vacant site is a little under an acre in size and is at the south end of an industrial sub-area situated just south of the industrial buildings of 3745 to 3785 Bayshore Boulevard. The site lies within the TC2 Southeast Bayshore Trade commercial zoning district, which is shown at the center of this slide in TC2. The applicant's project description was attached with your staff report, and the applicant proposes to use a previously established outdoor storage yard for the storage of vehicles, equipment, and materials. The site was used in the past by the city as a corp yard. It was previously paved and is partially separated from adjacent properties by a fence. The applicant proposes to clear the site of weeds, as you can see here, resurface the paving, fence off the entire perimeter with an 8-foot chain link slatted fence, and to provide for security lighting. The proposal is not intended for a particular tenant, but rather the applicant is seeking the Commission's approval to allow for general outdoor storage that could accommodate a variety of tenants over time. It is envisioned that this site could be used by a standalone tenant or as storage associated with those neighboring sites to the north. Access to the site would be via the existing signalized intersection at Bayshore Boulevard and along the driveway that serves both this property and those two properties to the north. The applicant is not proposing any restrictions on hours or days of the week when the yard would operate. Aside from fencing and lighting, no additional improvements for security are proposed. It's anticipated those would be handled by the tenant. The applicant has estimated a maximum number of vehicle trips would be 190 per day. No particular limit is proposed as a maximum to be stored at the site, but that's limited by the size of the site. Per the municipal code, a use permit is required for trucks and equipment storage, but material storage is not allowed as a conditional use in this district. There are some specific findings for granting of the use permit, and I'm not going to read all this. It's in your staff report, but essentially it has to do with consistency with the general plan. There's no specific plan for this area in question, and that the use would not be detrimental to the neighborhood or the city in general. So those are the basic conditions. And with regards to general plan consistency, the overarching guide for the city, of course, is the general plan. It provides policy and program direction for the city. This includes land uses, and land uses are established and regulated through the implementing ordinances establishing the zoning district and zoning regulations. This property and the neighboring properties to the north, as I mentioned, are TC2, which allows for trucks and equipment storage. Materials is not recommended since it's not allowed in the district, and so there's a condition of approval to prohibit that. And as mentioned in the agenda report, there's a few policies that address the mix of uses and providing for an economic base for the city, which this provides for, and it would put that already disturbed site to a productive use there. On the second finding, regarding it being injurious or detrimental, it would not be. It meets this finding as well. The site has been historically used for outdoor storage purposes and is located in an isolated industrial area. Its visibility was addressed in the staff report, as was traffic, and it is hidden from sight essentially by the topography and the buildings, except on the east side, which is visible from Sierra Point Parkway. And on that side, it'll have fencing, 8-foot fencing with the slats. Traffic was also discussed in the agenda report, and as mentioned, about 190 trips maximum per day. The vehicle count by Public Works a few years ago put total traffic on Bayshore Boulevard at about 26,000 vehicle trips per day, so this is a drop in the bucket, if you will. It would not have is not expected to have an impact on an existing level of service. As I mentioned, it's not the application is not for a particular tenant. So the conditions of approval would regulate the ongoing operations, and included in that is that a tenant would have to get a business license, and that would provide the opportunity for staff to review what their proposal is and make sure it's consistent with the use permit, as well as there are conditions regarding the ongoing operations of the facility. So finally, this has been reviewed by the various departments as well as a few of the outside agencies that might have an interest in this application. And their comments, there were no objections, but their comments have been included into the conditions of approval. So in closing, staff recommends approval of the use permit in part to exclude the material stores, but to allow for storage of equipment and vehicles. And that's via the resolution UP 617 with Exhibit A. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Ken. Any of the commissioners like to open with some questions?
I have a couple questions.
Commissioner
could.
Gooding?
Thank you. Do you know, and maybe a better question to address to the applicant, but how the number of visits or trips was arrived at 190 as an estimate?
The applicant may want to expand on this, but I think they looked at the size of the yard. It's a bit under an acre, and so they were looking at the limitations of the numbers of vehicles that would be able to be stored at the site. And I believe it was probably a trip in and a trip out per day. But
the reason for my question and my next question really is this, which is, as we all know, Bayshore, Old Bayshore is becoming quite a major artery for traffic. It seems like it's carrying a lot of spillover from 101 these days, people coming down Guadalupe and then using Bayshore to get to South City and onwards. And there's a lot more traffic, seems like, every month. And my concern is that the ingress and egress to this site is via the intersection where VWR was and so forth.
Right.
And so potentially every vehicle egressing the site is going to trip the light on Bayshore to red for the major flow of traffic. Because it seems like there's a trip control that asks for that, because it's a green through there except when there's somebody wanting to come out of there. And if that's going to significantly increase the outflow during commute hours, it's going to really significantly bottleneck Bayshore for people leaving Brisbane and coming back into Brisbane. So that's the sort of issue that I raise. I don't know what the answer is or what the options are or the tools are to use. Perhaps, so my suggestion would be that if staff could keep that in mind when reviewing the use or the business license for each applicant or prospective tenant, as to really how much that's going to be and what can be done about the traffic light issues. Seems like that's one potential quality of life issue that's going to impact people in and out of Brisbane every morning.
Right. We can certainly keep an eye on that as business licenses come in for consistency.
And again, just to add on to that, the timing of that signal is under the control of the city engineer, and the idea that, you know, the trips, the cycle based on output from the VWR site, you know, does trip the signal pretty quickly. He has the ability to change that. So again, to allow for the Bayshore flow, it might result in a slightly more delay for the occupants of the site. But I think it's something he would monitor in part of their regular sort of traffic flow monitoring situation. So that would be something that, again, we probably won't really know until, again, not only business license, but the actual comings and goings of these trips, whether they occur in peak hour or off peak hour. And again, those would all impact the functioning of that intersection.
Thank you.
Commissioner Saison?
Yes, I have a question about the conditions of approval, and one of the conditions is that the that the area shall be maintained in an orderly fashion, and, for example, non-operable vehicles shall be stored on the site. How are we going to monitor or enforce that?
So this would be something so the planning department, it's wouldn't be our routine to go out and check that all the vehicles are operating, but if does come to the city's attention through a complaint, or Public Works actually does annual inspections for stormwater type issues, so it could come to us in different ways, but it's once it would come, if it did come, then we would have the authority to enforce on that.
And is there like a fine that would be given, or?
It could be. Generally, what the enforcement is trying to get at is compliance first, but if there's not cooperation, then the city that does have the ability to fine through our enforcement.
Because as I was reading this, I thought, it's going to be, seems like it would be kind of difficult to enforce something like this, because it would be hard for us to see, well, how do we know if there's an inoperable vehicle there? It would be very hard. So I thought if we could put something in here that would act like a deterrent, that if, whoever is operating this facility is aware that if they were to commit a violation, they would be fined such and such amount, or, something that specifically lays out what the fine or whatnot would be, it would deter, any inaction.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to consider. One is that the municipal code, that's already baked into the municipal code. So, I'm sure the property owner can speak to their understanding of the implications of these conditions of approval and their need to, as a landlord, to make sure that their tenants operate, in compliance with the regulations. The other tool that the city has is also the potential revocation of this permit. The fining and the citations are one vehicle for compliance, but if the city found this to be a undesirable and poorly operated facility, the city does have the ability to revoke the permit, and we'd be back before you as a commission to determine whether they should continue operation.
Commissioner Patel?
Thank you. So when I was reading this, it seemed to me that it was similar. This is similar to a permit that was discussed on February 27th, 2018. That particular permit was UP-8-16, and it had to do with Bayshore, which, the Baylands and rental cars being stored there. And I just was looking through and making sure that I just remember from that meeting that there was some concerns about when they can operate, when they can drive their cars to the location, when they can leave. And I wanted to make sure that we're being consistent. And maybe we don't need to be consistent, because that was such a large scale operation. That was like 700 to 800 cars, and this is 196. But in terms of any other restrictions, is there some sort of consistency in the restrictions that you guys had considered with that particular permit?
Right. I was the project planner on that permit as well, and so I did look at both permits, and I saw that one as different, really, as you suggest, due to its size, much larger facility with more vehicle movements in certain times that this one is granted is a little more open-ended, but I think the size of the facility is really a limiting factor here. So we do have hours of operation included here, and those are essentially borrowed from the TC2 zoning district. This is TC2. TC1, which is Crocker Park, which is what we're in right now. So if you're within a certain distance of residential uses, then you're limited to a use permit would have to be issued for night operations. So there's some restriction on hours, but not the same restrictions in this case.
If I could add, there are two other sort of distinguishing factors. One is that, again, that was for an end user, and so we clearly knew where the vehicles were coming from and where the end of those trips were, as the airport. Here, we don't have any future tenants, so that's, we can't really know whether they're going to be going north or south. The other issue was Tunnel Avenue, as you all aware, is not exactly a roadway that's built for high volume traffic and heavy traffic because of the condition of the roadway, and so the idea that the flow of only moving northbound was much more important too, which then created issues of, well, if all the traffic has to go a certain direction, it's all going at the same time. We don't have that consideration on Bayshore Boulevard. The vehicles that use this facility will be able to egress it north-south, so we're not having that sort of direct pattern, and I think, as Ken pointed out, the number of trips is, again, very limited in comparison.
And I just had another question. This is my first day here, so I just have another question as it relates to language that's used in the attachments. I noticed that in the UP 8-16 attachments, there's an other section that sort of, it seems like it borrows, and I brought a extra sample of it if you guys would like to look at it. So maybe you can explain.
Well, I'll let Ken look at the details. I think it's important to realize that the temporary facility over off of Tunnel is in a different zoning district, and the findings for the granting of that particular permit are slightly different.
Right.
Than they are for this particular zoning district. So it would lead me to believe that some of the wording will be inherently different because of the required findings, given the differences in the two districts.
Definitely. So what I did was I did look up Brisbane Municipal Code section 17.40.060, and I looked at sections A and B, and then I also looked at 17.41.06F, as well as 17.41.070. So I do realize that that the Baylands area does have special requirements, and therefore the language in the other, especially part sections, I think the first two sections, Q and R, are two requirements that are in that particular section. However, S, T, and U are not specified, or I did not find them specified in that particular section as well. And in addition to that, does it hurt to include Q and R in our particular attachment? Because it seems like those sections would be relevant and on point with these two permits, as they are similar enough, and it seems as though all of those sections would apply in this particular situation.
Sorry about the sidebar here. Well, again, I guess we'll start with the simplest one, is that, and I don't know if you shared this with your colleagues or having a conversation, that they probably may not be
If you
fully-
could expound on what
Yeah.
you're looking at for us.
Yeah, well, we had in the previous use permit, there's some language that speaks to revocation procedures, and the wording may not be identical, but I think our condition Q in your current application is essentially substantially the same, gets us to the same point. It points out that this permit can be revoked. So that we think that's basically the same. I think the indemnification is, you can add it, I think it's kind of, redundant to other sections of the municipal code, and it's very clear that the applicant is liable for their actions under these permits. The city doesn't hold liability for the use of private property. If it makes the commission more comfortable, we can certainly add it. And then Q and R are the previous application. R and S are almost, they're redundant, internally redundant, so I wouldn't recommend adding that anyway, the same language. And then the previous one was very specific to the interim use permit. The interim use permits have a very limited term, 5-year limits. I don't, again, this permit doesn't have a time limit, so the idea of kind of making comments to the expiration of the interim use permit, none of those kind of, that language is really applicable to this particular permit application. So I wouldn't recommend adding similar language there.
And then the only other question I have, and I don't know if this is, I don't know if I was just comparing the two, is under the findings, there's a section that talked about in the other permit that we had to make a finding that it was categorically exempt from the zoning issues, and we didn't find that in these findings. And is that an issue, or is it not an issue?
It's not an issue. It's essentially, if you will, it's really more of an environmental determination that was made in page 1 of the staff report for this item, is that it's a CADX project. The interim use permit findings go a little bit further, and some you might argue are unnecessary, if you will, because it's a standard that we have to go through in any application, is to look at the application and how it relates to CEQA and what category it fits in, whether it's CADX or negative deck, or if it rises all the way to EIR. So,
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Patel. And before we move on to Commissioner Gomez, I want to segue off something that Commissioner Patel brought up, and that is the potential tenant and the use. It also addresses Commissioner Gooding's concerns about traffic, in that if the end tenant applies for a business license, I'm seeing all over now the Bay Area, since we had the project before us on the Baylands with Avis Rent-A-Car, and I'm seeing them everywhere. So if this applicant and property owner is approached, even if the lot is small and they're desperate and they want to use it for rental cars, I'd almost like to see something in here that triggers it coming back before the commission, because we had so many concerns about the frequency, number of cars, time of day, and that may never happen, but there were so many concerns related to that, and 2 have been brought up tonight, and I share the same concern.
Well, there are a couple ways of dealing with that. One is, if a body, you're not comfortable with the idea of kind of a blanket storage permit, then, the other recourse for the property owner is to wait till they have a tenant, and that tenant would have to come in and they would have to apply for a use permit for a particular end user. So, and if they change end users annually or every 2 years, well, they'll be doing conditional use permits. But if that's something the commission wants, that's certainly your prerogative. You don't have to grant this permit. It's a discretionary action before you. If there's some class of, like if you want to limit it just to rental cars or some other class where you say that you're excluding that from the conditional use, that's certainly something you could do. I would remind the commission we're getting kind of far into deliberations. We haven't opened the public hearing yet. I would suggest before you go further into deliberations mode here, we open the public hearing.
Okay, we still have one more commissioner. Commissioner Gomez?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Mackin. Other commissioners have echoed similar, concerns around traffic and what potential impact that could have, within the region. I really don't have anything more extensive of value to add. I think other than that we make sure that once there is a tenant in place, that the proper, operating hours and the oversight is there, because I do think we could have a significant impact if the volume is much higher than what is being estimated, and so that's really my core concern is once that tenant gets in there, that we are thoughtful in how we would permit the operating hours of that business. I think that's, for me, that's paramount. Yeah, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Gomez. I have one question before we open the public hearing, question of staff, which is that if this lot was used for, say, diesel trucks, and diesels notoriously, they like to keep them running if they're going to move them, is that something that would be permitted in this? And I'm noting this because of the proximity of the residential properties west of this site.
There is not a condition recommended to prohibit any, to prohibit diesel trucks. I know the standards for vehicles are getting stricter and stricter each year, and I think even more and more we're going to be seeing trucks going to electric even, and so. But no, there's not a condition for that.
But there are requirements through the Bay Area Air Quality Management District that restrict the amount of time that trucks can idle. So there are requirements that aren't under the city's jurisdiction.
Okay, and one other short question I have is just regarding the paving. And since we've seen the photographs, it hasn't had good paving for a long time. Has anyone reviewed drainage because of the proximity to the lagoon?
So this, although we have weeds coming up through cracks, I walked the site with the applicant, and it's still a hardened site. And there's not a proposal to change the drainage from what it has been over the years. So no, there's not a grading plan, if you will, because they don't plan to regrade it, just to resurface.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
It's a couple of follow-up questions. So my understanding from what I've heard is that you guys have actually done the analysis on, let's assume that it's 90 plus cars and it's rental cars. It's your opinion, if that was the analysis, that because it's significantly different in scope from what happened in February, that even if it was all rental cars, because it's such a small site and a small number of cars, the impact on traffic wouldn't be as significant as the other application. Is that correct? That's what I'm hearing, right? So then, in terms of, and then what I'm also hearing is that whoever actually gets the permit, or whoever actually uses this site has to get a permit, and at that point you can actually limit sort of the business conduct when they get this permit as well. Is that correct?
They would apply for a business license, which comes to planning, and so planning issues them either approval or denial, and at that time I actually process those, and I would attach these conditions of approval with that as a reminder to them. And so, yeah, it gives a chance not only to review for compliance and that it's consistent with the application that was made, but also to remind them as the user, which I'm sure also the owner would do as well, of the conditions that they need to comply with.
Again, just to clarify, make very clear, we cannot at that point impose new discretionary conditions on their operation. They'll be bound by these conditions of approval, and they'll need to, if they satisfy those conditions of approval, they have the legal ability to operate. We can't just administratively add more conditions at that point as part of a business license.
So I guess I just want to make sure that we're being fair to, like, let's say Avis, because if we were being more restrictive on Avis in February, are we in, and then let's say like Hertz comes and rents these 190 plus spots, are we going to be putting the same sort of restrictions on them as we would on Avis? Because it seems unfair if Hertz has less requirements than Avis would have.
I appreciate that. I think the difference is, you know, what the part of the issue at that particular use permit was the intersection, again, because all the trips had to go a certain direction. So you were then putting those trips potentially in conflict with Recology and other businesses that use that particular freeway on-ramp. So the fact set here, which is well removed physically, so the areas of impact, that particular intersection, Beatty Road and other substandard road, would not be impacted by any business operation on Bayshore Boulevard. So part of it just physically, they're in different sites that have different limitations and different use patterns. So and, you know, it's certainly if Hertz was going next door to Avis and then the fact set is the same, absolutely that would be an issue of concern. But given the fact set being very different here, you know, the conditions that we imposed on that particular site don't make a lot of sense for this site.
So and just to rephrase, the sites are significantly different. That any sort of restrictions on Avis that are not on Hertz, they would be because of the locations, and they're significantly different. So you can't use the same sort of standards. Okay, thanks.
I think it's important to make the distinction as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, that if this is approved, this permit tonight, it will not automatically trigger another public hearing before the Planning Commission if a potential tenant with a rental company applies for a business license. It would not come before the commission if this is approved tonight. Am I being clear?
That's correct, right?
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens, for example, if let's say there is a rental car company that gets put into that place and there is significant impact on traffic? What would happen if there was a complaint of that?
Again, the city engineer controls the timing of that particular intersection. In that particular intersection, to my knowledge and previous reviews, operates at, you know, again, and the gradation of how they grade intersections and traffic flow. Excuse me. It operates at an A, and an F is kind of considered substandard. I don't physically see a way you could generate enough traffic at this particular intersection signalized to degrade the level of service to F. And again, the city engineer, that's his judgment call to make, but that's how it would be handled, how he would manage that particular traffic facility.
So there would be a complaint made to the city. The city would do an analysis of it, and it would.
There would not have to be no complaint. The city engineer monitors the flow of traffic routinely at intersections in the city of Brisbane, so he can proactively manage it to maintain traffic flow.
Okay, so he could say it's going to a B, so I need to switch something up to make it go back to an A.
He could.
Okay.
So I think we need to move along on the public hearing. So we're going to open the public hearing, and I believe the applicant's here. If you could please step to the podium and state your name.
Christina Jackson.
Thank you.
Prologis.
And do you have a presentation for us tonight?
I didn't prepare a presentation. I came prepared to answer any questions that you have, and listening to the questions that you've had so far, it might be good to give some context on what we are thinking and why we're seeking a conditional use permit before we have someone who we know wants to take the site. So we purchased the site in 2016 and have done a lot of renovations to it, but we haven't had anyone who's been interested in the yard area. And before we go and spend money to do anything there, I want to know that we can actually have it occupied. So that's why we wanted to come here, get your take on how we could use the space moving forward before we made any further investment.
Okay, and commissioners, any questions for the applicant?
Do you have any clue what prospective kinds of tenants you're looking for and how you're going to market this? I mean, you've heard our concerns about potential traffic issues because Bayshore is becoming, I'm not sure what to call this. Is there a different name for the little sort of alley by which you access this lot other than Bayshore? It's a Bayshore address, but Bayshore is the main artery. Just
Right.
for terminology sake.
Bayshore is a major arterial. It's actually a former state highway,
Yeah,
I understand, years back. The VWR, I won't say the whole name, the long name of the road is actually a private drive. It serves the, primarily really the two major warehouse buildings there that are already occupied
Right.
by tenants, and so, you know, this would be an incremental increase on what's already
Right. And sorry for
happening there.
Sorry for the
So,
parenthetical. I was just trying to call it the right thing. So people coming in and out of this private driveway are going to impact the traffic on Bayshore because of the nature of the light currently. So do you have any sense of how you're going to market this? I mean, 190 cars seems like a lot of cars to store
Yeah.
if they're not being used or moved or operated.
Right, and it's kind of a funny shape. It's not a perfect rectangle, so
It is.
I don't. It's to be seen how someone could actually utilize it. I hadn't actually thought of rental car companies before I heard your questions tonight. I'm actually responsible for leasing a pretty large portfolio of industrial properties in this area. And one of the things is that people are often supply constrained, so they don't have places to park their fleet. I was envisioning more a locally based company that just needed to park those extra trucks or cars related to their business. That's what I think is most likely to happen, based on the kind of incoming calls that I have and the conversations that I've been having with brokers. I don't have another just yard area in the market to speak to, but for example, one that I have in San Leandro, it's a customer that I have in a space, and he has, 53-foot trailers that he secures in a lot about this size with us there. So that was a use that I could envision here as well.
Any other questions?
From my knowledge of Prologis, they tend to be a very responsible property manager. That's just from my experiences working with them across the state. I don't know if that helps us in our thinking, because we have been concerned about this, possible rental car scenario. But based upon my knowledge of what the types of tenants that Prologis has, it's not typically rental cars. It's more, kind of warehouse operator, businesses such as that. So just wanted to kind of contribute that to the conversation.
Okay, any other questions for the applicant?
I have none.
No?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Could we have a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close public hearings.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? No. Okay, commissioners, discussion. How do we want to proceed on this? Who wants to go first? Commissioner Gooding?
My only remaining, it seems like a fairly innocuous may not be the right word, but a fairly low grade or low level use of the property in general terms, although we don't really know, I guess the highest use would be, a rental car lot, which raises some issues in my mind. My issue remains with sort of process of what happens if we wind up with a tenant there who gets a business license because the application for the license nominally meets the conditions in the use permit as currently stated, and it winds up in the real world in the application of it becoming a a traffic issue or a use issue of some other kind. I think traffic's the most obvious one, but there might be others I can't anticipate. So what the process looks like for sort of getting that either back before the commission or dealt with. And I'm not, it's my first night here as well. I'm not sure that the application as currently stated has an easy process for that. Maybe it just kicks back into the complaint system and the commission hears the complaint somehow. I'm kind of curious about how that would work in the real world.
Okay. Commissioner Sisa?
So, I think I might have overlooked it, but how long is this use permit for?
There's no sunset date on it. That's how most use permits are, is they run with the land, and so the interim use permit is a unique situation in the Baylands, and that's essentially it was something looking forward to potential redevelopment of the area, but for this there's no sunset date.
Well, I mean, the only thing I can think of, I mean, if there's this concern about traffic, and even though it's unlikely that, you know, a rental car company will be there, if we're concerned, should we put something in there in the conditions of use? You know, that.
Well, the other option that staff gave us is to deny the permit now, and then the applicant, if they had a tenant that they felt was suitable, they'd have to come back before the commission.
So
Am I
that would
correct?
be is that our only option? Like, we can't approve it with a condition that if they were to, you know, want to, you know, have a rental company go in there, they would have to come back for that.
You could do that. You come with a class of uses that you don't want to include within this interim use permit, whether it's rental cars or whatever it is. Sure, you can do that as well. Giving you the range of options.
Right.
You can approve it. You can approve it with modification, or you can deny it. These are really your sort of three classes.
Because it seems like from the applicant, she's stating that it's probably unlikely it's going to be used for a rental car company, so I wouldn't want it denied on that, you know, just that possibility. So maybe we grant it, but with that condition that if they want to have a rental car company come in, they'd have to come back to us.
Or, I mean, does it have to, how specific does it have to be? Like, what if we just said, unless there's a significant impact on traffic?
Well, two things. One is, I think, what would probably tip the scale. Again, there's the perception of traffic, and then there's the modeled traffic results. And I think sometimes what the commission's reacting to is perception that doesn't necessarily meet the test of failure in terms of kind of traditional traffic modeling. So I don't know if that's really the bar you want to set. You could. The other thing is that, and this is probably something we'll talk about more as the commission, you know, some later issues, that level of service as a metric of traffic is being phased out of CEQA. It's not. Intersection performance and delay is basically will not be by state law an environmental impact by next year. So I don't want to put in a standard that I know is going to be basically superseded or irrelevant in a year.
So what standard can be placed into this so that we could somehow moderate or somehow monitor the impact on traffic?
I think the problem is we're having a very a discussion that's really not informed by factual analysis in terms of, I mean, you're talking about whatever, how many trips did that other facility have? 100 and...
I think it was 150.
It was quite a bit more, at least, I want to say at least 3 times more.
Per day. Certain days were heavier, other
Yeah.
days were lighter.
The facility itself was much larger too. It was nearly 5 acres, whereas this is under an acre, actually.
Yes.
I believe I rounded it to an acre. It's really more like 0.8.
But Tunnel Avenue is not Bayshore
In Tunnel
in terms
Avenue.
of the impact on the residents of Brisbane. I mean, the residents of Brisbane use Bayshore as the main way in and out of town, and not Tunnel Avenue.
Right.
And every time somebody coming out of the private driveway trips that light on Bayshore, it's going to back up people trying to get into and out of Brisbane in a way that is not the case with Tunnel Avenue. It's really apples and oranges.
And
Right.
putting
There's
aside
another factor, I guess, to consider is the size of this site compared to, you have a site plan. And I don't have the parking counts, but for the warehouses themselves, and so this is really an incremental increase in the overall parking and the number of trips that you're already seeing there. So,
You know,
it's just something to gauge. But I don't have.
Now, I drove there yesterday to look at the site, and I went in, and when I came out, I tripped the light and brought everybody to a halt going back and forth across Brisbane. And that's just one car, not 190. And that was, 11 o'clock in the morning when it didn't matter much.
Yeah, that's another issue, is I don't know that that's, as someone who drives that road routinely in the morning on the northbound Bayshore. Again, the signal timing is often adjusted peak hour versus other times of day. So I'm hesitant to say that at 7:30 in the morning that's being tripped on a single vehicle. So I'm worried we're sort of making assumptions here and making a decision based on assumptions. So I think you really need to unwind what you're trying to accomplish here with what do you want to have control over in the future. You're not going to have control over the intersection of the functioning of that intersection. That's going to be the control of the city engineer and how he times that signal and how he changes the phasing to make sure that it operates. So I'm not sure what you want to, you can put a land use limitation or control, but if your intent is to somehow manage that intersection, that's not this particular process. A use permit isn't the vehicle to control a functioning intersection and how it's signalized and how it's phasing and how it cycles.
We haven't heard from Commissioner Gomez.
Yeah, again, my concerns around traffic are similar, but I do look towards the fact that if this is Prologis as the property manager, I cannot see this being, and due to the size, I understand your concern with the similar applicant in this car rental scenario. I guess I'm looking at it from and I understand the traffic concerns, and I'm there with all of you on this, but I think that so much is going to be dependent on who that tenant is, and if we can't put the parameters through some special condition on the approval of this, of this applicant, that it would have to go down perhaps the unfavorable path of a complaint or something of that nature, of realizing that the tenant is operating in a way where we didn't necessarily want them to. But I think that the space is so small. I'm just looking at it from I went out there too. I can't see it being this phenomenal impact. So that's really where I stand. And I think it's something we would have to evaluate over time. That if there were impacts, not only to traffic, but also potentially to, additional wear and tear on the road, for example, because I'm an infrastructure guy. I think about, just beyond just the movement of people and things, that it could have, long-term infrastructure impact. I think there's a lot of, kind of variability there. If Prologis, as the property manager, gets a tenant in there who just needs to store some extra trucks and materials, and really the majority of that space is let's just say dormant from a logistics standpoint. It's pretty much things are sitting there and they're moving from month to month, but it's not this huge traffic scenario that we are envisioning, which I think is responsible to do. My instinct tells me that due to the size of this property and the location that we would be doing the right thing, approving this applicant. That's where I stand right now, based upon all my observation.
And what I'm hearing from staff is that the 190 vehicle limit is small enough where the city engineer can engineer that light so that it remains an A level of functioning, is what I'm hearing. And so I understand what you're saying where the light gets tripped if someone goes there, but I think that that can be addressed by the city engineer, just changing the algorithm that trips that light at certain times so that traffic isn't affected by the 190 car limit.
So if I can weigh in here, the traffic signal that Commissioner Gooding sees changing, I've seen it change many times northbound, and if a car turns right coming out of that facility going north, it will trigger the light and the car is long gone and you sit through this long light because there's nothing on that signal to prohibit it from triggering the light if someone just turns right on red. So that's a problem. But I think my concern is simply it's harder to unwind something and deal with complaints. I think the proposed storage of vehicles don't have a problem with it, really don't at all. I would like to see just a condition that if this was to be used, I do believe in the fairness since we reviewed Avis. If this was to be used as a car rental lot, size whatever, I'd like them to come back, talk to us, and tell us something about the operation. But any other storage of vehicles, I don't see a problem at all. So that's one condition personally that I would like to see in there. Anyone else?
No, I think that's, I'm agreeable to that.
And that's just in that, just being prudent so that people say, well, you're giving them a blank check and now we have a problem and now we're trying to fix it. And it's in fairness to the applicant as well, so that we're not saying a car rental company storing vehicles that we deny it, just that we want more information. And as staff's pointed out, we don't have enough information on that. So rather than deny the permit, I'd like to see us approve the permit with that one condition. Everyone else? You want?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way of dealing. I mean, I think I took the point well made that we shouldn't micromanage the intersection, and I wouldn't. And you're right. We shouldn't do that. But I think that's maybe a good little backstop or a kind of a ceiling that to keep it at where anything below that is so unlikely to be a major problem that fine, you know, the staff can deal with it and public works can deal with it. But if it's going to be a major impact, why not solve it on the front end?
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking about, again, your concerns and maybe the other thing you can do. I think that's an excellent suggestion for that particular end user and issues that you can foresee. We can also add what is essentially an advisory condition that any operations of this facility will not degrade the operations of that intersection to a less than acceptable level per the city's general plan, per the analysis of the city engineer. So again, you have now sort of a backstop for some concern that for some unforeseen fact set that we're not aware of right now, and that gives the city engineer and the planning department the chance to reopen it because, hey, something's happened fundamentally with the operation of Bayshore and we didn't anticipate this. So I would suggest we add essentially an advisory condition to that effect as well. Just hopefully gives you a little more comfort that if something were to change dramatically, either in this operation or the functioning of the roadway, that we'll have an opportunity to review it again.
And the applicant as well, in speaking to prospective tenants, if they are approached by a car rental company, you can say they discussed it, they may be open to it, I just need to go back with info. So that being said, any other comments, discussion? So do we have a motion?
Yes, I make a motion that we approve the project with the one conditional use requirement that that if the tenant will be a rental car company, that it comes back to the commission.
Okay. And the additional condition about level of service on Bayshore. So that's really two. And do we have a second?
So I second the motion with the two conditions added to the attachment A.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No one opposed? Motion carries. And I should mention here the appeals process, that anyone may appeal the action of the Planning Commission on a use permit application to the City Council not later than 6 calendar days following the Planning Commission's decision. Thank you, applicant. Thank you, commissioners. So moving along. Items initiated by staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple items. One, you probably are aware that the council had a Baylands meeting last week and did direct the preparation of a general plan amendment considering a range of residential uses as well as a certain square footage of commercial development. That particular amendment will go straight to the council. It's really kind of part of that deliberations. It won't be referred back to the commission, so you will not be involved in that particular discussion. That'll stay at the council level, so I just want to make sure everyone was clear on that. Secondly, Commissioner Gooding and Commissioner Sayasan and myself are headed down to the League of Cities Planning Commissioner Workshop next week, and I think it's always a great opportunity to kind of meet your peers and hear some of the issues they have, and I think it's good for me to hear, again, from the commissioner perspective, what some of the hot topics are. So we'll look forward to reporting back at our next commission meeting as to some of the information we learned. So that's, again, part of what we're trying to do here, is make sure everyone has the benefit of what we have the opportunity to learn. And lastly, I think our meeting tonight was a good sort of entree into the idea that staff is interested in setting up some commissioner workshops on some of these issues that we're talking about, like CEQA, findings, other sort of issues that are covered in that commissioner handbook. And so we'll kind of set up a schedule we'd use it as kind of a regular meeting, maybe have a workshop in advance of the formal meeting or after, depending. But we'll kind of work with the chair, whoever that will be, and kind of come up with a schedule. And again, as commissioners, as individuals, if you have particular topics that you're interested in having further sort of technical assistance or discussion about in a kind of that informal workshop setting, please just pass it along to me, and we'll go ahead and kind of come up with, I could see this taking the course of, several meetings over 6 months, 4 or 5 meetings over 6 months, maybe once a month, topic by topic or topics that are of concern. So anyway, I want your feedback. We're again trying to make it as useful and productive for you, and make sure that your time here is productive. So
And your
that's
time as
all I
well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Are there any items initiated by the commission? Seeing none, okay, we move to selection of planning commission officers. I'm supposed to ask for nominations for chairperson. Self-nominations are acceptable. Nominated individuals must accept the nomination. Multiple nominations are possible. And let's just begin.
I nominate Commissioner Mackin as chair for 2018.
I will second the nomination.
Any other nominations? No? Okay, I would accept. And so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Motion carries. Thank you very much for your vote of confidence. I hope to serve you well.
Do we also have to do a nomination?
And a vice chairperson. Sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, nominations for vice chairperson. I would like to nominate Commissioner Sayasan.
I will second that.
Any other nominations? And would you accept?
Yes, I will.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposition. Motion carries. Okay, at that point, we're up for adjournment. If someone would kindly make a motion.
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll
And
second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
That went smooth. Better than I thought, though.